Anything said on Hillbilly Broadcast should be taken only as opinion. Also, the views and opinions expressed by guests of the program that we interview do not necessarily reflect the views of the hosts of Hillbilly Broadcasts or its advertisers.
Please remain calm. There is no need for alarm. This space is now being taken over by Hillbilly Broadcast.
All right, so Mike Robbins, you've got quite the resume here, sir. You've got looks like you've written 5 books. You got 24 years speaking experience. You got a podcast called "We're All in This Together."
Yep.
I pulled your website up here. That you've been featured on NPR, ABC News, Oprah Radio Network, New York Times, etc. Man, this is a very impressive resume. I like it. Also, said you got some, as far as speaking clients, include Google, Microsoft, Wells Fargo, NBA, several of them listed here. So let's start off a little bit of your background, Mike, if you don't mind. Where you're from and kind of give me the early story of you.
Born and raised in Oakland, California, and played baseball all growing up. That was my passion. That's what I loved. I actually got drafted right out of high school by the New York Yankees. Didn't end up signing a contract with the Yankees because I got an opportunity to play baseball in college down at Stanford, which is about an hour from where I grew up in Oakland, and then got a chance to play college baseball, which was awesome, and pitched in the College World Series, and then got drafted by the Kansas City Royals out of Stanford and did sign a pro contract and went into the minor leagues, as you do in pro baseball, and was trying to make my way up to the big leagues. And unfortunately for me, my 3rd season filling minors, I was pitching for the Wilmington Blue Rocks against the Durham Bulls, and I threw one pitch. I tore ligaments in my elbow and blew my arm out at the age of 23. And 2 years, 3 surgeries later, I was forced to retire from baseball and did not know what the heck I was going to do with the rest of my life, because that was the plan. Came back home to California, got a job working for a technology company in the late 90s, and was kind of going through a lot, as you can imagine, trying to sort myself out and figure out who I was post sports and baseball, but really got interested in, I loved the game and was really sad and disappointed when my career ended. But one of the things I had become most fascinated by when I was playing was I was really interested in team dynamics, because I was on some teams sometimes where we had really good talent, really good players, but the team would underperform. Usually it was, like coach wasn't great, or guys had bad attitudes, or there were a lot of egos, or whatever it was, we would underperform. And then sometimes I was on teams where, the talent was decent, but the team was fantastic. We would beat other teams that had better players than we did, which was cool, but didn't really make sense. I mean, we called it chemistry, but no one knew what the heck that was. But when I got my first job, Phil, I noticed, oh, that's not a sports thing. I thought I had to do with sports. Like, that's a human thing. It's just a, group dynamic thing.
Sure.
My first manager was calling it culture. And I was like, what the heck is that? But it was just all that intangible stuff. And after a couple of years working for a few different tech companies, I got so curious about that. I just wanted to sort of focus on that full time. And that's what I've been doing for the last 24 years, is researching and writing and speaking about that, like how do human beings actually work together and get along and communicate and collaborate, even and especially if they don't always necessarily agree with each other or like each other or wouldn't necessarily be friends with each other, because that's the world we live in.
Sure.
So
let me ask you this, if you don't mind. What caused you to turn down the Yankees contract? Because I'd imagine a high school kid, that'd be pretty tempting to jump on that, right?
Yeah, the way it works in the baseball draft, that year in the first round, the Yankees took a guy named Derek Jeter, who turned out to have a pretty good career. I was not drafted in the first round, so, I was drafted much later. So the economics of it were such that, it was definitely tempting. But I had also had a minor injury, and education was really important to my mom and in my family. And so, and also in baseball, even if you're a first round draft pick, if you sign at 18 years old, you're going to spend 3, 4, 5 years in the minor leagues anyway. And the baseball caliber in the Pac-10 at that time, and even still now, was such that if I had gone to Stanford and played, I was probably going to get a chance to get drafted again, which I did 3 years later after my junior year. So, it was a risk, but it felt like a smart and calculated risk. And I ended up getting drafted higher by the Royals 3 years later. And truth be told, it's better to get drafted by a team like the Royals or the Pirates or the, Twins as opposed to the Yankees or the Dodgers, because it's harder to get to the big leagues if you sign into a big market organization versus a small market one. So all in all, had I not gotten hurt in the minor leagues, it would have worked out really great for me the way that I planned it out. But it's it's a tricky endeavor when it comes to pro sports like that.
Sure. Sounds like you're kind of playing the long game, maybe realizing that, I could do a little better for myself.
I mean, and look, the reality is the chances of making it to the big leagues when you sign out of high school are still pretty steep, even though obviously you're pretty good if you get drafted. But I did feel like getting an education would be important, even though I didn't have any real clue what the heck else I would do besides play baseball.
Yeah.
But that was what all the smart people around me were telling me at the time, and it seemed to make sense, even though I was an 18-year-old who thought I knew everything,
So, what is it that you do, Mike? Would you consider yourself like a motivational speaker, or what do you fall in a classification?
I mean, the companies that bring me in, some of the ones you mentioned, I do, about 70% of what I do is speak at, big sales meetings or leadership meetings or all hands meetings inside of companies. But the other 30% of the work that I do is I work with a lot of teams, particularly leadership teams, and help them as they're going through change or they're going through challenge, or business is up and growing dramatically or it's down. And, whatever the dynamics are, I'll often come in and just help leadership teams navigate through changes and challenges and different dynamics. So I enjoy doing that work and just getting to work with people from all across the country who are in different interesting situations.
Sure.
Yeah.
Very cool. I have a list here that it's some of the things that you a lot of times you focus on. I was looking down through this list, and there was some items that definitely jumped out to me. For one, the whole like letting go of self-righteousness. That one really struck out to me. I came from a very strict religious background.
Mm.
So that self-righteousness thing, I had that bad. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm still a believer. All that. I've just changed my thinking a lot. Versus then, so that one really stuck out to me as far as letting go of that.
Well, and the thing is, I often will say, whether we're talking about it in the context of religion or politics or deeply held beliefs, the difference between self-righteousness and conviction is a really important difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm speaking to a group, I'll often say, how many of you like me have a lot of opinions? And of course, everybody raises their hand. And I said, how many of you like me think your opinions are right? And, we all kind of laugh about it. But the thing is, self-righteousness is like, I'm right, you're wrong. And when we come at it from that perspective, what we're doing is we're setting up this dichotomy, this me against you, us against them, my way or our way versus your way. And, again, whether we're talking about, religion or politics or things, again, that really matter to us, we can still hold those beliefs really deeply and strongly, but come at it from a place of conviction. And what conviction is, I believe this to be true. And I'm willing to speak up about it. I'm willing to express myself about it if I choose to. I might be in the minority in this particular group of this idea or this belief or this opinion might not be held by the vast majority or anyone else in the group. And again, sometimes in business, it's just like I have a differing opinion than, whatever people are talking about in this particular meeting or this decision we're making. But conviction is I have enough humility and enough self-awareness to realize a couple of things. First of all, I might be wrong, right? Like it's possible I could be wrong because oftentimes in life, just think about so many things. I think about parenting. My wife and I, Michelle and I have two daughters. Samantha's about to turn 19 and Rosie's 16. And I've changed my mind about different aspects of parenting a lot over the last 19 years. Not because I'm an idiot, not because I didn't know it, but because I learned new things or the world changed, or I responded to what was happening with our girls. And it's like,
sure.
Oh, so we can change our minds. We can update the way we think about things. But sometimes it's not a right, wrong thing. Sometimes it's a belief thing. It's a values thing. And from a place of conviction, we can hold our values and our beliefs really strongly. But we can also say, I'm aware that there's another way to look at this thing that maybe I don't necessarily agree with or believe, but I know that it's possible to look at this thing differently. My way is not the only way. And that can be tricky for us, especially in the world in which we live these days, where so much is coming at us and it feels like we're sort of put on the spot to like pick a side and decide what you think about this. And it's like, all these binaries that we find ourselves in consciously or unconsciously. So it can be really tricky.
Yeah, I think especially nowadays with it seems like cultures or society has so much division in it.
Yes.
You talked about that whole thing of realizing that you can be wrong. I remember when a lot of this really hit me was back during like the 2016 election cycle. And, I was always real, I'm right. I got this figured out. Wouldn't really talk to people that I disagreed with.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of my friends, I realized some of them had a little different viewpoint than me. And it was almost like a light bulb turned on where I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I don't have to go into this conversation to try to win an argument. There's an opportunity here for me to see how this person thinks and also test my beliefs up against what they got.
Yeah.
And, kind of then go back. Because a lot of times I'm very hesitant to change my mind as far as like on the spot. I like to go back and kind of digest, think about what I've read or what somebody's told me. And I think in the long run, it benefits a person quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing, when you think about it from the standpoint of self-righteousness, the natural human response to self-righteousness is defensiveness. So when we bring that self-righteous, again, I'm right, you're wrong. Again, we're talking about politics. I often joke with people, say, have you ever gotten to the end of a long political rant, maybe even whether you could get all the way through it or not, that you disagreed with, say, on Facebook or somewhere on social media, and at the end of reading it, you went, you know what? They have a point. I'm changing my mind. No, I don't think anybody's ever done that. If you didn't already agree with them to begin with, you're not going to read that thing and go, wow, they've now pointed a bunch of things out that I hadn't considered. I'm changing my mind. Like, we get into these defensive postures and it goes sort of tit for tat back and forth, whereas we're not really hearing each other. And part of the thing is, we're not defending ourselves against the points that the people are making. Sometimes someone I'm in an argument with will make a very good point, right?
Yeah.
But if the argument gets heated enough and there's a lot of self-righteousness back and forth, I'm now defending myself against either explicitly or implicitly being told you're wrong.
Yeah.
Because that does not motivate change in people. And so, again, if we're trying to influence people, I say this to leaders all the time, like, you want to get people on your team to do certain things or engage more, if sometimes someone does something that's incorrect, right? They make a mistake, but there's still a way to coach someone, whether it's an employee or even, our kids or whatever. There's a way to engage with someone who makes a mistake or even does something that's not just a mistake, but they violate a policy or they do something, you catch your kid lying or whatever, right? It's like, we don't want to say, oh, that's no big deal, but there's a way to go about coaching someone or giving someone feedback that doesn't come at them with that self-righteous, like, you're wrong and you're bad and how could you do that, even if we're not saying that, because in that situation, the person is going to defend themselves as opposed to hear the feedback.
So what's the, I've got a little 2-year-old, so obviously I'm going to be dealing with a lot of this. What is the, what's the way to go about that then?
Well, listen, for what it's worth, the 2-year-old days are different but similar to the teenage days. There's a level of irrationality that you have to. Well, but part of it is, like, again, understanding the difference between conviction and self-righteousness, and it's tricky, but it's subtle, but it's significant. And then the other side of it is actually bringing in a certain amount of vulnerability. So again, it's hard. With a 2-year-old, it's hard to kind of have a rational discussion if they're having a meltdown, right? But ultimately, I remember when our girls were in that stage, someone coached me about 2-year-olds that they're like little mini Neanderthals, that as they're sort of melting down, you got to just like move them so they don't hurt themselves or hurt anyone if they're really melting down. But ideally, when they do calm down, even as young as they are, and as sort of, underdeveloped as their brain ultimately is, or where it will get later on in life, there are ways to talk to them about, well, what happened? Well, how are you feeling? Well, what's going on? Or here's the line. This is what you can do and what you can't do. Because again, all of us, whether we're 2 or much older than that, we do often need some parameter from the people around us on where the boundaries are.
Sure.
And again, we can go about putting those boundaries in place without it being this self-righteous, if you step over this line, you're a bad person versus, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's subtle, but it's significant. Because I do think when we talk about some of the political divisiveness, one of the things that I have noticed, especially over the last decade, because my work isn't overtly political, but as I travel around the country, what I find is if I'm in places of the country that are more conservative versus more liberal, yeah, some of the ideas and things people are talking about might be a little bit different. But in general, one place of common ground that I've been finding, especially more recently, is that just about everyone I talk to is concerned about the level of polarization and divisiveness. Now, they might have different opinions about what's driving it or who's responsible for it or what the dynamics are, but I don't know too many people that will raise their hand and say, yeah, I think it's great right now. I think the climate feels good. And it's, you know what I mean? Most people are when I talk to people about going, we go through the holiday season. How are you feeling about being around your family and your in-laws? And almost everyone across the political spectrum is like, oh gosh, I hope politics don't come up because it could get pretty ugly at dinner,
Yeah.
And I think in some ways, like weirdly, can we use that as like, okay, can we start from a place of, this probably isn't the healthiest, most conducive way for us to engage with each other. How can we talk about things or not talk about things, but do it in a way that's actually respectful and productive?
Yeah, it's very good. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, Dr. Andrew Graham, some time ago. And we were just talking back and forth on Facebook Messenger. And he was telling me, he's like, Phil, just because somebody's different than you politically, a lot of times we're all trying to get to the same place.
Yes.
We all, most people care about, their fellow man and they don't want to see hungry, starving people and all this, that, and the other. So a lot of times we're all working for the same goal. We just got different ideas on how to get there.
Yes.
And one of the last episodes that we put up, I had a Democrat, Libertarian, and a Republican all at the same time. And it was amazing the amount of common ground that we all found just sitting there having a conversation.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, when we get into actual conversation with real people who we might disagree with, we could yell at each other on Facebook. But if we're sitting across from one another, whether we're on the phone or we're in person having a conversation, what we find is like, there's so much common ground. And, and we may disagree on the approach that we think is the best approach to take or what policy or what decision or, and that's, I don't think anybody's afraid of disagreement in this country. We're pretty strong and tough. It's just, the nastiness and the villainization and the us versus them. When I wrote my book, We're All in This Together, I actually wrote it in 2019, knowing it would come out. Again, it's about teamwork. It's about collaboration. It's about a lot of the stuff that I talk to in the business world with my clients. It was based on, basically 20 years of research I had done up to that point on teamwork and collaboration. But I specifically was excited to write it and put it out, knowing it was going to come out in the spring of 2020 in, an election year, in a time where things had gotten pretty politically divisive. And I spoke to some of that in the book a bit. Well, of course, I didn't know it was going to come out a month into COVID and the pandemic and there was all of this, right?
Yeah.
But one of the stories that I share in the book, Phil, is I was on an airplane flying. I can't remember. I think I was flying from like Fort Lauderdale to New York or something. I was out speaking at some events, and I was on a JetBlue flight, and there, the TVs were on, and I wasn't even watching the TV in front of me, but I was flipping channels before I got to do some work. I had my headphones in, and I was actually editing a podcast episode and listening to some stuff, and the guy sitting next to me starts pointing at the screen in front of me because I had CNN on, and he starts going, fake news. And I was like, what? And then I'm like, is he talking? I take my earbuds out and I'm like, excuse me? He's like, that's fake news. Why are you watching that liberal propaganda? And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is happening? I'm literally minding my own business on the plane. And so I just start engaging with him. And very quickly, our conversation escalates, right, into this thing. And I'm like, what is happening? Like, I literally do not want to be arguing with this man I don't even know sitting on the plane, right? And I'm trying to be like calm and reasonable. And well, what about this? And well, but I'm like getting more frustrated and a little heated about it. And then at one point, I look at him and I say, or maybe he had brought it up in the conversation. He'd mentioned about having kids. He had 4 kids. They were older than mine. They were all like in their 20s and early 30s out of the house. And, this was 6, 7 years ago. So ours were much younger. And I said to him, sometimes as a father, I try my best, but I worry sometimes that I'm screwing up, that I'm just, because it's hard. And he looked at me kind of weird, like, why are you saying this? It was kind of a non sequitur from what we were talking about. And I just said to him, do you ever feel that way as a father, or especially when your kids were younger, like the age of my kids? And again, he looked at me a little sideways and he was like, well, yeah, I think everybody feels that way. And what I did was I injected a little bit of vulnerability into the conversation. And all of a sudden, the conversation went a little bit deeper and more just human and personal. And I said, maybe, look, I have some strong opinions about politics and things that I think and things I'm concerned about. But at the end of the day, some of these problems are so complex, I don't really know what the answer is. And he just kind of looked at me again, like a little weird, like, what is this guy talking about? But it was just this moment of, we were able to connect kind of human being to human being. Like, we're both humans trying to do our best. We're trying to be good husbands and fathers and people and citizens. And like, we're allowed to have opinions. We're allowed to disagree and even debate each other. But like, can we remember that we're human first? And, as important as it is to me that I'm an American, it's like, I also just feel like I'm a human first, and then I'm an American. And then, you know what I mean? Like, so I don't know. I don't want to oversimplify it, but I just feel like sometimes we forget that, a friend of mine likes to say, you walk through the cemetery, doesn't usually say Democrat or Republican on the headstones.
Right.
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 And I, that's not what we talk about when we show up at someone's memorial service, is who they voted for.
100%.
And I think it's turned into, in some ways in our country in the last few cycles, and maybe this last generation or two, it's now turned into weirdly like a religion.
Oh yeah.
We're so identified by our political, leanings that it's gotten, and that concerns me, because I don't think that was the design. I don't think the founding fathers were like, you know what? Let's separate church and state, and let's have everybody take on the state as their religion based on their party affiliation.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that was the intent at all.
No.
I think that, and I've said this before on the podcast, but I think sometimes we're so quick as a society to sever relationships over politics, and we're severing relationships over people that don't even know our name. When it really comes down to it, if we can't pay our bills, or if I'm a little late paying rent or something like that, they're not going to lose a night's sleep about it. It's almost like splitting relationships over sports, really. I mean, yeah, it's
right.
Obviously,
I know.
In the grand scheme, yeah, it's more important than that. But still, yet, as far as just, it's not worth, not being able to see family or something like that.
Right. Right. And then I think, it is also, if we could be a bit more real about it too, whereas I think sometimes, like I had that conversation I had with that man on that plane. I mean, the truth is, I have a lot of strong, passionate opinions or things I get concerned about. But at the end of the day, I also feel like, I consider myself a relatively intelligent person who pays attention to things and has, read some stuff over the years. But like, I don't understand a lot of things. And, there's a lot of complex things that happen, not only within the government, but just in life in general, where it's like, and another thing that I've been thinking about more recently too is just the rise in, misinformation and the intensity of the algorithms that we're all susceptible to. That, like, you can be sitting next to someone and look at their phone and scroll for a while and realize, oh my gosh, we're literally living in different universes.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And that's really intense for all of us to just take a step back and go, am I actually getting accurate information about what's happening in the world? And if so, how do I know? And can I check? Because, again, when my parents were growing up, they turned on Walter Cronkite and listened to him. And then I don't know if that was 100% accurate or not, but everybody was listening to it and everyone believed that it was. So we were all kind of, I was trying to explain it to my daughters years ago. I was like, girls, it would be like if the fans for the other team were watching a different game than we were watching. And at the end of it, we'd say, our team won. And they'd say, no, our team won. And it's like, wait a minute, what the heck just happened?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It seems like in this day and age too, it takes work to actually find out what the real story is. And I think a lot of people just don't have the time or the bandwidth to really track down every rumor. And a lot of people are just too quick to believe whatever flashes across their screen. I tell you what, the social dilemma, I don't know if you ever saw that.
Yes.
That one was an eye opener for me. My gosh.
I had a chance to meet Tristan Harris, who was the guy who created that film when I was at an event. He used to work at Google, and he's a fascinating guy. And the work they're doing is really important. And it's scary when you watch that documentary, right? Because you realize, oh, wow, there's a profit incentive in keeping us divided and yelling at each other because they just want to keep us engaged. And there's all of this research and data that shows us that outrage spreads really fast on social media. Again, and the dopamine hit that we get from scrolling and finding something to get upset or offended or angry about. And it's tricky, right? Because I want to be informed, but I also don't want to be mad all the time.
Right.
It's like, well, it's like, what are we doing? Or, the whole, so it is really tricky that how we have to all sort of manage our consumption of news and information, who we're listening to, what we're reading, what we're paying attention to. And it's harder. I mean, it used to, for me personally, it used to be easier to kind of unplug, disconnect. But now it's like, I think of my phone, which I have a love-hate relationship with. It's like my whole life, my business, my personal communications all flow through it. So I have to really manage myself for how much time am I spending, both the things that will just waste my time and have me not be productive, but also things that might potentially get me all upset and angry about something. To your point, a bunch of people I don't even know. It's like I'm forgetting to interact with the real people that I love in my house. And I'm upset about what some person I've never met is saying online, or some story about something that's happening on the other side of the country that really ultimately has nothing to do with me personally. I just have an opinion about it.
I think one of the scariest things for me that I saw in the social dilemma, and I can't remember the guy's name. He was one of the vice presidents of Pinterest. And he said that, I was involved in kind of designing this thing. And when I would get home, I'd catch myself spending 30 minutes just aimlessly scrolling through it. He's like, I had helped build this thing and it trapped me, and I knew what it was.
I know. Well, and there's all these stories that have come out over the years, and I live right near Silicon Valley and work with a lot of the companies down there. But, and you've got a 2-year-old, whereas you hear all these stories of people developing the technology and then not letting their kids use it. I mean, it would be like, you work for Philip Morris, the, cigarette company, but of course you're coming home and saying, kids, don't smoke, and it's like, it's tricky, right? Because it is, there are things in the world that we wouldn't all necessarily line up behind and say, this is the greatest thing ever. But at the same time, everybody's got to feed their families. And the interesting thing about technology is, you think about technology is amazing in that you and I can be having this conversation right now, and then it gets posted and people all over the world can listen to it. And that, to me, my dad passed away back in 2001, but my dad's career was in radio. He was on the radio from the time he was a teenager. And sometimes I have this moment and I'll say to my wife, I'll just say, if my dad somehow magically came back today and I said to him, hey, Dad, guess what? I have a radio show, but it's not really a radio show. It's called a podcast. And I sit in my office, or sometimes I'm in a hotel room on the road and I plug in a microphone into my computer, and then I can talk to someone who's somewhere else in the world and I interview them, and then we record it and then we post it, and anyone on any device on the planet has access to listening to that on demand. Right. My dad's head would literally explode. He would be like, I don't even know what you're talking about. That sounds like space age craziness, right?
Yeah.
But that's technology is amazing in that way. We can communicate with people. We can see people on Zoom. We can send and share information in incredible ways, but it's also dangerous. And we all have to manage it ourselves. And it's taken over our lives in ways that we're not even fully aware of.
Mm-hmm. I agree. What did your dad do in radio?
He was an announcer. So, I mean, that's what, he was, I mean, I guess you could call him at some point, he was a disc jockey, but my dad was born in 1933 in Connecticut. And at the age of 14, my dad was on a show that was live on NBC Radio National called Mind Your Manners.
Wow.
And he was the junior host. And the host of the show was a famous guy named Alan Ludden, who married Betty White. And it was basically a show for teenagers. This is, my dad's 14. This is like 1947. And it turned into a TV show that my dad was on a few years later, where basically kids would call in and they would write in and say stuff like, I want to take Susie out to the movies. I don't know how I should ask her.
That's great.
Or, if I take her to the movies, do I buy her the popcorn? And is it okay to hold her? It was all this. It was very, but that was the essence of the show. And then my dad went to college in Connecticut and then got into radio in New York and then moved out here and worked for various different radio stations and mostly did some news, did some sports, but
that's very
just cool. From the old school, like, he used to play, my dad was such an old guy. He was playing like big band music. He was a big Frank Sinatra guy, but he had this great voice. And, when I was a kid, he was on KFOG radio in San Francisco. And I used to go into the studio. His show was on from noon to 4 every day. And as a little guy, I just remember he would put me in the recording studio sometimes. And I would put the headphones on and I could, turn on the mic and hear my voice in the headphones. And I just thought that was the coolest sound ever because it sounded very booming and professional, even though I was this little guy.
Absolutely. Yeah, my dad was born in 33 as well. And when you think about, the stuff they saw, the stuff, that changed in that span of time. Because like Dad, he could remember his dad sitting around the table, like when World War II was going on and being like, boys, you might have to fight in this one day because they didn't know how long it was going to go, of course, and all that.
Right.
So you just think about everything that's happened there.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you too. I see here you talk about empathetic listening.
Yes.
Expand on that a little bit.
Well, one of the things, there's two pieces of it. When I was saying earlier about vulnerability, if we can show up with vulnerability, as hard as that is, the natural human response to vulnerability is empathy. So one of the ways we can elicit some empathy in others, you can't manipulate people, but so there's the way in which, as scary as it can sometimes be to be vulnerable, it's a way to get people to understand us and also find that common ground. Empathetic listening is really, we're listening to what they're saying, of course, but we also want to try as hard as we can. Again, we can't read people's minds, but we can listen sort of behind the words. Where is it coming from? You know what I mean? Sometimes, as hard as it is, when someone's upset, when someone's scared, the saying often goes, sometimes when we're scared, we get scary. So like, think about, again, your 2-year-old. It's hard. Again, 2-year-olds are, I remember those days. But oftentimes your 2-year-old is having a meltdown about something. It's not really about the thing, right? There's something else going on. And so even another human being, even our spouse or our friend or someone, it's like, they're upset, they're stressed out. And now, it's the classic sort of, you get in the argument with your wife about the right way to load the dishwasher. And it's like, that's not really what it's about. It's about something else. So again, empathetic listening is just trying to listen to the person and the emotions in addition to the content of what they're saying. Like I often say to managers, like, if you ever had someone come and say something to you, but you feel something else, and almost everybody says, yeah. Okay, and so what you want to learn how to do is both listen to their words, but then see if you can, without being nosy or pushy, check in and maybe ask a question or just clarify something. Okay, so it sounds like this. Am I understanding that? I'm curious about, or just, it sounds like you might be frustrated or annoyed. Like if you can get an upset person to say the word yes, that will calm them down. Right? So someone's upset about something, they're frustrated, they're stressed about something. It's like, instead of defending against whatever they're saying, okay, whoa, it sounds like you're upset. Yeah? Yes. They're less upset.
I see.
Right? If you immediately try to, one of my favorite sayings is, in the history of calming down, no one has ever calmed down by being told to calm down.
Yes.
right? Because
Yes.
what we're basically saying, if someone is, look, and sometimes we want people to calm down, right? But if we tell them calm down, what we're basically saying is like, it's not okay for you to feel that way. And that in and of itself, if you're anything like me, is going to escalate your frustration.
Mm-hmm.
When someone says calm down or relax or slow down or, but if it says, whoa, wow, you seem really upset. Yes. Okay. Whew. And maybe you're someone, it's really hard for you to talk to someone else who's upset. You might even just say, whoa, I want to hear you, but I'm having a hard time with all the words or all the intensity or something. But you just come at it from a place of, if you feel safe enough, you can really hear both what they're saying, but the emotion of where it's coming from. And if you can speak to that, they're going to feel a little bit more heard and seen. You don't have to agree with them, right? The person might be upset about something that you might completely disagree with or think is ridiculous, or ultimately you're going to have a conversation where it's a bit of a debate discussion, but you still can be empathetic about it, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And even when we're talking about the political stuff too, I always try to find a place of like, okay, I disagree with someone politically. I want to get into an argument about it, but can I stop and really listen? Where are they coming from? What might they be afraid of? What are they angry about or concerned about? Can I hear that? And then is it possible that they might be able to hear some of my concerns? Not that we're trying to convince each other otherwise, but we're just trying to understand where, because it seems to me, so I don't know your experience of this, but it seems like a lot of people across the political perspective right now, the political spectrum, are scared and angry, maybe for different reasons.
Yeah.
But that is a common piece. Okay, I'm feeling scared, you're feeling scared. Maybe we're scared of different things, but can we bond over the fact that we're both feeling scared?
Right.
And really have some empathy for each other? Like, it's not that fun to be operating from a place of fear all the time.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I like it. It's something I'm going to definitely work on. I see a lot of value there.
Yeah.
I listened to one of your recent podcast episodes, which I thought was fantastic. The podcast is called "We're All in This Together," right?
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to the "Get on the Court" episode.
Yeah.
Which I felt like spoke to me in ways that you said things that I need to hear because so many times I'll think about whether it's, I'm a musician, whether it's recording music or trying to sit down and write a song or something to do with the podcast. You just find yourself just not doing it because of whatever, the fear that you won't do it right or anything like that. So that whole concept of get on the court, I thought that was a fantastic episode, and one I recommend to anybody to go check out.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, yeah, years ago, I took a series of kind of personal growth workshops, and they would use that metaphor of like, are you in the stands or are you on the court, right? And it was like, and I even though I was a baseball player, I played a little basketball in high school, but the idea of like, the court, the arena, the field of play, whatever that is, and down on the court, look, it is sometimes you screw up, right? Sometimes you try to take the shot and you miss it. It's an air ball and everybody laughs at you and you're like, oh my gosh, I wish I hadn't taken that shot. That was awful. But like that's the only place where the game you actually can have an impact on the game. And in the stands, now look, I love going to sporting events, whether it's basketball or baseball or football or lots of like I enjoy watching a game both on TV and in person, but I'm aware of even if I'm at, a Golden State Warriors game, which I live in the Bay Area here and have been a Golden State Warriors fan since I was a kid. Great crowd, really loud. Sure, it has some impact, but ultimately, I can scream as loud as I want. I can't make 3-pointers for Steph Curry. You know what I mean? Like, he's the one down there. And the thing is, even when you're, an elite athlete, you're going to fail sometimes. You're going to, screw up, and it's going to be your fault. And I think in life, if we can put ourselves down on the court as much as possible, even though it's scary, even though sometimes we make mistakes, even though sometimes it doesn't go the way we want it to, and it can be painful, it's like that's where the action is. That's where it happens. And I think I was listening to an interview with Daniel Pink, who wrote a book on regret a few years ago, and he was talking about, did all this research on regrets, the different types of regrets that people have. And like one of the biggest regrets people have are what he calls boldness regrets, meaning not going for it, not trying, not asking that person out on the date that you wanted to, and then wondering what would have happened if I did, not raising your hand when they said, who wants to volunteer for this job? Or, putting your hat in the ring to try to get the promote, whatever it is. You know what I mean? It's like playing it safe, trying not to screw it up, which is a very human thing that we all do. But I think there are so many opportunities for us on a daily basis to get on the court. And the question always is just, do we have the courage and are we willing to fail? Not that we want to, but are we at least willing to?
Sure. I think for me, a lot of times too, Mike, hearing things that you're talking about here, I'll hear this kind of stuff and realize that this is fantastic information. But then as time goes by, you kind of forget it and you have to be kind of jolted back into it again. Like the concept of get on the court, get involved and do it. Probably in 6 months, I'll have to have a refresh. So I probably want to save that episode actually and go back to
totally
and play it.
Look, it's a practice. I mean, and again, not to just keep bringing this back to politics, but it's like I say to my friends right now who might be very upset with the outcome of the election or the whatever, get involved, get engaged. And even if you're not upset, it's like, what are the things that matter to you most? And look, we can all sit around and just talk about it or wring our hands or post on social media or complain about stuff.
Yeah.
Or we can try to get involved. And it's like, you could sit around and complain about the school that your kids go to, or you could show up and volunteer. I mean, look, not everybody has a lot of extra time or resources necessarily, but there's always stuff that we can do. And I think there's a narrative going around these days, which I understand, and it's not even specifically about one side or the other in politics. Oh, there's so much negativity. Oh, it's people are so there's all this bad news out there. The very first book I wrote years ago is called Focus on the Good Stuff. And basically what I was saying in that book is like, we can choose where we put our attention. And focusing on the good stuff doesn't mean we stick our head in the sand about the challenging things. It just means that there usually is there's a lot of good happening that most of us aren't paying attention to. Right? Because the bad stuff gets look, and if you're sick, that's going to get your attention. If you fall down and break your leg, that's going to get most of your attention, right? But oftentimes, even when something really bad happens, one of the silver linings I have found in my life is it tends to wake us up to a lot of the good stuff we weren't paying attention to if we're fortunate enough to survive whatever the thing is. That was my big realization when my baseball career ended. Yeah, I was disappointed that I got hurt and I never got to the big leagues. But my biggest disappointment was that I didn't fully appreciate it while it was happening. I was actually pretty good at it. And I did have some fun, but I was often so obsessed with not screwing up. And really, I was this raised by a single mom. We didn't have a lot of money, kid from Oakland. Like, I was going to make it to the big leagues and like be famous and buy my mom a house and, my pitch at Yankee Stadium. And I mean, I had all these hopes and dreams and they didn't happen. But I got to go to Stanford and pitch in the College World Series. Like, I got to play professional baseball for 3 years and live out my dream for 18 of the first 25 years of my life. That was pretty cool.
Oh, yeah.
I wish I would have enjoyed it more.
Sure. Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah. And even like you've got, at one point, even when your 2-year-old is driving you crazy and up all night or throwing a fit on the foot, whatever. I know it sounds like a cliche and I hate to be, but there will be a moment 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, where you'll look back and think, oh, that was so sweet.
Oh, yeah. I try to remind myself of that all the time to just, specifically with him, to just, hey, man, enjoy it because it's going to go by fast.
I say to people all the time, right now is the good old days at some point down the road.
Yes. You're so right. Well, as we're winding down here, Mike, I wanted to give you one last question. I was curious about this. So when you're dealing with some of these companies, like let's say, for instance, NBA versus something you're working with Google, are there any, do you see any specific challenges for one type of company versus another that you have to try to work with?
Yeah. I mean, I think, in pro sports, say, versus technology versus, healthcare or education, nonprofit, defense, retail. I mean, there are different challenges. And like, look, if you're working for a retail company these days, the world has changed a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Retail's tough in America, right? Everybody buys everything from Amazon for the most part, right? So, I mean, that's going to be a challenge if you work in a brick and mortar store. I mean, especially in a post-COVID world and just with how everyone operates, technologically, let's say. So what I find, though, I mean, my work focuses a lot on people and culture and sort of how we communicate and collaborate. So again, some of the companies I work with, it's small enough, or the nature of the work is everyone has to be there in person all the time because that's how the work gets done. Again, if you work at the Gap, like you all got to go back to the store if you work in the store. So many companies these days, especially in technology and in other places, like the good news and bad news is like people can work from anywhere. The good news is there's a lot of flexibility and freedom, and you can hire people all over the country and the world, and you can sit at home in your sweatpants and do your job. The bad news is it's harder to communicate and collaborate and connect and actually have understanding and empathy for each other. So I'm finding my work really, really interesting and stimulating these days, but challenging, and trying the best I can, like I always did, but especially these days, to understand what are some of the different nuances and challenges that exist in certain companies and certain industries. Like we've had out here in Silicon Valley the last couple of years, even though we technically haven't been in a recession, like the tech companies have really been in a tough spot after COVID.
Mm-hmm.
It's coming back and things are returning to a little more of normalcy, but just sort of knowing a bit of that often impacts the way that I, work with people. And in general, I would also say, I think collectively people are doing a bit better today than they were, say, just a few years ago, just in terms of the exhaustion and the different aspects of life. But by and large, most places I am these days, Phil, people are pretty tired.
Yeah.
And that seems to be a common theme. So it's like figuring out how do we all individually and collectively, recharge ourselves, because back to the social dilemma, I mean, people are going to work and then going home and they're staring at a screen 24/7 instead of, back a few decades ago.
Absolutely.
Not that it was necessarily all good, but it was just very different.
Yeah. You mentioned about people just being tired. That does seem to be a common refrain these days. People just, it's like we're wore out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, there's a lot of different reasons for that. I don't think we've all fully recovered from the pandemic. And I also think
I agree.
The nature of the public discourse around politics and some of the things you and I have been talking about, I think it's exhausting. And I don't think, again, I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not someone that understands how the brain and the nervous system really work. But I don't think we're designed to take in this much information all day, every day, the way that we do.
Yes.
And I think, again, it's happened very, very quickly over the last decade or two. And it seems to be speeding up, not slowing down. So again, how we manage that individually, how we unplug ourselves from it and get ourselves, one of the things I do every morning when I wake up, I walk out into our backyard in my bare feet as a way to ground myself onto the earth, because I live in a relatively urban area and there's a lot of concrete around me and whatnot. And so it's like, okay. And I'll stand out there sometimes for just a short time if it's really cold, or a longer time if it's not, but just to put my feet on the ground, take some deep breaths and just look out, over the bushes and remind myself, I'm here, I'm good, I'm grateful, just that's one of my daily practices. And it really does seem to help most days.
I'm a big Joe Rogan fan. I listen to him quite a bit. And he said something one day that really caught my attention. He has this theory that a lot of the depression or stuff that we see these days, he thinks that it's linked to how things have gotten more and more convenient to where we're not actually fulfilling what our body's actually designed to do, as far as, hard work or something like that.
Yeah.
But that might have an impact just with this, we're in this total technological state where, again, like you said, we stare at a screen all day.
Yeah.
And
no, I think there's definitely a lot to that, because, setting things up so we can actually use our minds, use our bodies, move around, go make things happen, as opposed to just press buttons and have it show up on our doorstep,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mike, it's been very good talking with you. Where can people find out more about you, get your books, the podcast, all that?
Yeah, best place is at our website, which is mike-robbins.com. And I'm on, all the socials at Mike D. Robbins on X and Instagram. So, but our website, mike-robbins.com, is the best place.
All right. Well, thank you again, Mike. It's been a pleasure talking to you, buddy.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Phil.